Good afternoon. Welcome everyone. Today we will be covering payroll basics. We'll be introducing you to what would be involved should you decide to use our payroll system, and hopefully answer questions that you or the current users may have. This will only be covering a basic setup and use of the system. For more complex queries, please feel free to contact our training department during business hours. Okay. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions that haven't been covered, please pop them into the chat box and we'll cover them. Okay, this is an overall view of the kinds of things we'll be covering today. Starting from general ledger and your parent accounts and setting that up. Your awards, labels and codes, setting up your employees, ensuring your allocations are set up correctly, setting up your employee allocation tags, processing a simple payroll batch, and looking at various reports and month-end procedure. Okay. Payroll systems available both in ShopTalk and TradeTalk systems. Release 1 users can find this under the payroll menu, and Release 2 users can find it on the default menu by typing in payroll into the Run ID box. Okay, so we'll switch to the system now. Any helpful tips? Let's just go back here for a second. Any helpful tips before we get started is have your documentation ready and at hand, and that's things like how your employees need to be set up and all of that sort of stuff. Any ATO information, get some answers for them before going in and setting up the system. Okay, so the first thing we'll look at today is your general ledger. And for the purposes of this webinar, we'll be using the Release 2 software system. We won't be using Release 1, this is Release 2 version. Okay, so to find general ledger, you simply type it in the Run ID box, and it will take you to the first instance that it finds, which is your detail inquiry. Now, we won't be using that just at the moment. What we need to do is to go into the basic setup, which is under Parents Maintenance, and that will be under the Maintenance section. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at currently what's set up as your general ledger wages. So doing a question mark search for wage, that is searching the description of the name. So if this differs, then you'll obviously need to change that for the description of the actual general ledger account. Pressing enter, and that brings up a current general ledger account. This is a parent account that actually does have a general ledger underneath it. You obviously can't post to a parent account, but you can post to the accounts underneath the parent. Okay, so if none existed, what we would need to do is to tick the new box down the bottom here. The cursor should default to this little box where it's flashing at the moment. And then what we need to do is type in the number of the account that we wanted to use. In this instance, it's already created, but it was created under 1800. Then press enter, and then basically enter your description, your category, your BAS code, and tick this little Add GL account box underneath to automatically create an account underneath that parent. And it's as simple as that. Okay, just remember for this webinar's purposes, we'll only be covering basics, so we won't be looking at anything like divisions, locations, departments, or anything like that. For more information on that, please contact our training department during business hours. So the first thing we need to do in payroll after they have been created is to configure the codes maintenance. So the first thing we'll need to look for is awards maintenance. So if we type in award, it will take us straight to awards maintenance. Opening that up, what we'll do is we'll click Find to see what's currently in there. Now we currently have 4 awards descriptions. These at this point in time aren't linked to anything, they're just names. Later on they will be linked to the employees. And as you can see, they're pretty much self-explanatory as to what they cover. So these can be added as seen fit by your setup. To create a new one, all you need to do is, again, tick the new box, type the unique identifier, i.e. the number in this bottom left-hand box, and press enter. Then enter the description of the award. And anytime you need to, you can come in here and click find like I just did to see what currently exists. The next one we'd need to look at is annual leave maintenance. And as you can see, that's right underneath there. So we'll open that up. Again, clicking find finds what you currently have in your system. Just going through the basics on this. We've got fraction and weeks. Now, if it's based on a fraction, it is literally using a fraction to calculate the leave. So 1/13 would calculate a 13th of the leave. And in other words, if there's 4 weeks every year, it will, when it's calculating a 13th, it will be calculating essentially a quarter, so 1 of the 4 weeks. It doesn't mean it will accrue 1 week per 13 weeks worked. It is simply a fraction. The other option here is your weeks option. Users enter the number of weeks per year. As you can see in the column here, weeks per year. And if it's calculated during the year, during the first 52 weeks, or after the anniversary date has rolled, or after the anniversary date, after the date has rolled to a year after the start date, it will then accrue. So basically those two in a holidays accrual thing here, during, it will accrue during the year, after means it will accrue after the first anniversary date is reached. Okay, the next one we'd need to look at, and again you can create new records in here as you see fit by ticking the new box, entering the ID, and then following through with the information there. That's pretty simple. The next one we need to look at is your long service leave. And going in, clicking find what we currently have. We have calculation based on months and weeks in here. And there's a difference between the two, but we'll start at the beginning. It's basically whether months or weeks apply when the system does the calculations. According to our records, for New South Wales employees, as a rule, get 2 months long service leave after a 10-year period of service. So as you can see by this record, that's based on the guidelines that we have. So the initial qualifying years, it is the time, the initial qualifying years before the employee is entitled to it. So for instance, if 10 is in here, they don't start accruing any long service leave until after the 10-year period. Now that is based on a permanent date on the employee record. Initial qualifying months or weeks, in this instance here, in this record is 2. So after the first 10 years, they will then get 2 months long service leave. You can enter up to 2 decimal places in this field, as you can see. Then you've got the subsequent qualifying years. So 5 years after the first 10 years, they start accruing another 1 month, according to this record. And the contingent is when they start accruing leave but aren't entitled to it as of yet. So after the 5-year anniversary date of this employee, they then start accruing a contingent, but it's not until they reach the 10-year period that they're actually entitled to take that leave. Now, laws can change when it comes to that, and that is the kind of thing you'd need to double check with your ATO in relation to. And this is all based on the employee's permanent date. So please make sure that the employee has that information correct before you start using the system. The next thing we need to look at is personal carers leave. And again, that's the next on the list. So we'll open that up. Clicking find, we have 4 different ones in here. Days will be calculated according to the days in the first year, the days in the subsequent years, and the qualifying months fields. So if you look at record number 3, it is based on days. So the days in the first year, they get 10 days sick leave in the first year. They get 10 days sick leave in any subsequent year, but they don't actually they're not actually entitled to it after the 3-month period has passed. Okay. If it's based on a fraction, it's actually based on a calculation. So in this instance, it's based on 1/26. So again, it's doing a calculation, it's a 26th. What you would normally do, it's dependent on how many hours per week the employee is set to work also. For instance, an employee usually works 35 hours per week. The system would calculate this as follows. You'd take the hours per week, which is 35, you'd divide it by 26, and that you would get 1.3462 hours per week for your sick leave. You would then take that figure, 1.3462, you would multiply that by 52 weeks of the year, obviously, which equals 70. So that's 70 hours per year for sick leave. You would then take that figure of 70, divide that by 35, so that's the hours per week, which is 2. So that would equate to 2 weeks per year of sick leave. And again, you can change that formula according to how many hours per week the employee works, and if you change the formula here as well. Again, this does differ according to legislation, so this is again something you would need to double check with the ATO or a similar body in relation to that. And the last codes we need to look at is your superannuation maintenance. So we go in there and we click find. We've currently got 4 records in there. This is actually reflective of the change from 9% to 9.25% recently. Again, I reiterate, just double check your information. Now, if we take the middle 2 records, 2 and 3, as being the current records, as they are 9.25%, it is quite literally after they reach the 450 threshold, then they would get the 9.25% superannuation. And that is simply how you add them in here. In any area of the system, tick on the new box to create a new record, give it an ID number, press enter, and you would go through following through with the rest of the information that you'd need to fill in. Okay. So going back to the ACR system. Now we need to have a look at your payroll allocations. This forms quite a bit of the basis of the system, and to find that, you would find that in your payroll maintenance area, and it's called pay allocation maintenance. So opening that up, you see that you've got a screen with lots of different options here. If we click find, it'll bring the list up, as you can see by the scroll bar on the right hand side, of all your different records. So the first one we have is casual ordinary hours, but as this is a test system, I'm going to scroll to the standard ordinary hours. As you can see, they've each got an account number. So when you create a new record, you would generally give a consistent number to your different types of records. A guideline that we here use is for any income type, it starts with a 1. For any taxation type, it starts with a 2. For any deduction type, it starts with a 3. And with any settlement type, it starts with a 4. You can choose to use your own numbering system, however, it is entirely up to you. Just give each record a different number. So once you've set your account number and the description of the record, you also need to give it a sort key that's used commonly for when you're searching for the record. The next thing to set would be your GL parent, which has previously been set up. And that's the importance of doing your general ledger first, is because you would need that set up already before you come in here. Then you've got your transaction types. As you can see, it's income, taxation, deduction, and settlement. Most of the information is based on income, so we'll cover that first. So your income type, once you've set the transaction type as income, your income type, there's a list here. For an amount, which is the first option in the list, it's a flat dollar amount generally. So for instance, something like a car allowance, you specify a dollar amount in the employee allocation record, and then you can manually enter that into payroll entry. For a factor type, it's more like something for leave loading and things like that. For factor hours, it's exactly the same as factor, except the hours will be included in the total hours worked. And a common occurrence of this would be overtime. Your ordinary hours, which is what this is in this instance, is the first and foremost record in which you would earn your ordinary hours. So employee allocations don't specify the amount. During payroll entry, ordinary hours will be read from the employee file and the normal rate will be used. A rate is something like a car allowance per kilometre travelled. The rate may be specified in the employee allocation record, or it may be manually entered into payroll entry. Then there's standard. This represents most other incomes that are standard to most employees. For instance, annual leave, personal carers leave, long service leave, etc. During payroll entry, you manually enter the hours and the employee's standard rate will be used. Then you've got the key hours, and that's for things like flexi time accrued. It tracks the hours accrued only, not the rate or the amount. Okay, then you've got the tax class underneath, and you've got a few different options to choose from here. Exempt is exempt from tax. Standard tax, this is the norm, and it's your standard tax rate according to the ATO. Your leave loading is quite literally used for leave loading. A point to note with this is up to about 320 per year, according to our records. It is not taxed per employee. You'd need to contact the ATO for more information on that though, however. Your termination standard is what you would normally use for terminating an employee. Termination special disregard, that's only for special circumstances. Your annualised over weeks, if this is selected, you would then enter the number of weeks in the field below. It's not based on a threshold. Your calculate at rate is a manual percentage rate. When this option is selected, a rate is required in the rate for calculate field, which will become available below. And then you've got your zero tax, which is either zero or a manual amount entered into payroll entry. It's generally used as an exempt tax class, but you can override that in payroll entry. Then you've got, over on the right-hand side, things like your holidays and your flexi time effect. This is what you would set according to what is accrued, what is taken, applicable to each pay allocation that's set up. So for instance, with the ordinary hours, this is currently set to hours accrued, so it will accrue hours for this. Flexi time is not affected. Work cover is not affected. Your personal leave would be accrued as well whenever you use this allocation. Your long service would accrue and your super would accrue. The PAYG payment summary down here specifies if it appears on your payment summary and where. You do have lump sum amounts, allowance amounts available there. For more information, please contact the training department or any department you would need to get more information in relation to that. Okay, so that is how you would basically set up allocations. We do have a guideline on our blog. The address will be listed at the end of the webinar. The guideline will give you an idea of a general rule as to how things have been set up in the past, but that is not the be-all and end-all. That is something you would need to double-check information on. Okay. Right, once all pay allocations are defined, we need to go back to the payroll configuration to set the following. So to have a look at the configuration, it's in your configuration area. And to see this on screen, this top section is showing what appears in your payslips and what doesn't. You can decide, based on whether you're using e-documents images or not, whether to have 1 page or 2 pages per payslip. And the 2-page option would only be available if you were not using e-documents images. Otherwise, if you're using e-documents images, you would have to use 1 page. Okay, your PAYG payment summaries section down here is where you would enter your information that will actually print on your PAYG payment summaries. So this is a summary. If you click on the File Details button, this is the area where you'd fill in the most detailed information. And then again, remember, this is something that will appear on your payslip, on your PAYGs, so you would need to double check with the ATO what they have on their records as well. Okay. The next section is your termination accounts. So this is where you would set up, if you were going to terminate an employee, what the default allocations you would be using when you bring that up in payroll entry. So you've got your termination record there and you've got your leave loading. You do need to define both of those. Whether or not you use a loading within the termination is a case-by-case circumstance, but it still needs to be defined here. You've also got your superannuation accounts. So you've got your expense and your liability, one that you just need to specify in here. This option here, do not journal invalid super, is basically whether you're telling the system whether or not you want the invalid whether you want the invalid super to be journaled or whether you want it to be ignored. Now, if you ignore it, it will not come up in your general ledger, so just bear that in mind. Lastly, in your payroll bank configuration here, you've got your file name, your company name, and all these other bank details information. Now, this is generally if you bank online, and most places do these days, the bank would give you some information. You'd need to contact your bank about it. But the bank would provide you account number and user ID information that's set in here for when you're actually going to upload a file that is output from the ACR system. So you would need to double check the account number, the user ID number, and the output. So this is either self-balanced or non-balanced. Each bank has their own format, and they would need to advise as to which that would be. The purpose for this is if you're doing a payroll batch, rather than going into your online banking and manually entering in those figures again, you can output the file from the system and upload it via this information, and it will automatically load them into your banking system and automatically deal with it for you. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is to set up employees. So what I'll do is I'll show you an example of what we have in the system. And going in and clicking Find will bring up the first one in the list. Let's find a good example. This one will do. Okay, so to create a new employee, tick the new box down the bottom, give the ID a number. Now bear in mind, if you're trying to use a number where you've made an employee inactive, it will not let you. It has to be a unique identifier that hasn't been used before. Okay. If the staff member is a casual employee, don't enter a permanent date. The reason for this is if, like this record here, if there's no permanent date, it will not start accruing any leave. So to go through the main points on the main screen, You've got your name, you've got your sort key, which is again a commonly used search for that employee. You do have an inactive tick box up here. For instance, if you're not going to be using that employee for a while, you can mark them inactive rather than terminating them without having to go through that process. Once you've terminated a record, however, you cannot reuse that, so please bear that in mind. You've got all the basic information. You've got your birth date, address details, home and postal address details, 2 spaces for phone numbers there, the start date and the permanent date if it's applicable, and generally speaking the start date would be the same as the permanent date, but it does depend on the circumstance. Then you've got your annual salary. We won't go through any salary components that has to do with salary sacrifice and things like that. We're just going to leave it as basic. Then you also do have the super annual extra amount, so that's basically extra super that the employee decides that they want to pay on a regular basis. You can also set that up as an automatic salary sacrifice as well. You'd specify the pay cycle from the options of weekly, fortnightly or monthly. Your normal weekly hours. You won't fill in the next pay date because that is automatically done by the system. You do, however, need a tax file number for the system. Specify a super fund as previously set up as in your codes maintenance. Your member number if you have it. What award they're under. And generally speaking, you would leave these 3 cost divisions, cost locations and departments as 0 unless you're actually dividing out your payroll system. In this circumstance we are not, so they are being left at 0. The next button is looking at your taxation, and you do have different types of taxation elements in there. You've got a no tax file number in the circumstance where the employee has not provided it. You've got a no exemption, a general exemption, a flood levy, we'd need to double check on the status of that one, and PPS is generally a contractor-based tax. You can round the tax as well if you wish, or put in extra tax per week if you like as well. You also have an option in here for a help debt. If you have any employees with that, they can have that set up in the system as well. Your entitlements button shows what entitlements they currently have. This is this hours balance now column, or row as I should say, is what they're currently entitled to. You do also have a contingent amount, which is, as I explained, what they are accruing at the time but not actually entitled to as of yet, and the date in which it was last accrued. You do have a long service pause days in here, so for instance if someone goes on maternity leave or something like that, you can pause their long service for the amount of days entered into here. Okay, then you've got your codes maintenance down here where you specify what codes they're actually applied to them as set up in the system previously. You also have an audit button down here which shows you a rundown of any manual changes that have occurred on that employee. So for instance, if they've had any changes made to their entitlements manually done, that would record it in here. You do also have the option of printing a report, an audit report. It will default to the current financial year. Click generate and I'll give you an example to screen. Okay, apologies for that. And you can see where a manual adjustment's taken place and where an automatic transaction has occurred. So a manual adjustment here, automatic, manual, automatic. You can run that at any time on any employee. Okay, so exiting out of here, we've gotten that. Bank details. This is important to fill in at least number 1 if they're being paid to a bank account. You would need to put at least number 1 in there. If they're being paid to more than one bank account, you would specify 1, 2, 3, etc. You would obviously need to make sure also that there are pay allocations set up for all 6 bank transactions here. Whether or not you use all of them, it doesn't matter. Most commonly, people would use one. So that's why you'd need to set up your bank details in here. So this is automatically printed on the report that's used. Okay, you've got your salary components, which is essentially your salary sacrifice, which is what I mentioned before. We won't, however, be going into that today. You've got your PAYG summary, so if there are any allowances or deductions that apply, or even an FBT amount that apply to a particular employee, the FBT amount is actually entered in here. The rest of them are descriptions based on what will appear for those descriptions on the PAYGs. So this is not an amount. The allowances and the deductions are not amounts, they're descriptions. The FBT amount is a figure though. You've got an identification area if you wish to upload a photo of the employee or any information about the employee, you can do that in here. This is a summary of the current financial year, and you can use previous years as well of what's been paid to the employee as a cumulative total. You've also been to that. You've also got your e-documents area, and this is basically where you'd specify if they're being emailed or faxed their payslip, you would specify that in here. Now bear in mind this is only if you're using e-documents images. If you are not, this wouldn't apply. Okay, and that's your employee maintenance. Okay, I've gone through all of that. Bear with me, I am just going through my notes to ensure I've covered everything. Yep, so the next thing we need to look at is employee allocation tags. Now once you come in here, this is the records here are based on the employee number. So if you've created an employee number 1, and you haven't yet come in here and created employee allocation tags, you would just enter 1, press enter, and it would bring them up. Now employee allocation tags are used for in payroll entry if you have employees with a certain format as to how they're normally paid. For instance, if it's just the basics, they pay the ordinary hours, you pay the tax, and you pay to their bank account. That is the minimum in which you would need to set it up. So you would need to have at least 1 record in here for income, 1 for taxation, and 1 for settlement. You don't necessarily have to have a deduction set up in here, but income, taxation, and settlement are required. So to do this, I might bring up another employee. Okay. So to create a new record, and at the moment it's set to income as we can see up here. Create a new income record for this employee, tick the new box, and it brings up a line at the top. Now I have already got this in here, so I'm just going to add it again for the purposes of showing you how to add it in. As you can see, because it's already in there, it's removed that line and brought that other one up. Now this division location department, leave it at where it says employee file, because that means it will grab all the information it needs from the employee record. You don't need to specify an amount in here, because that's generally just giving all of the ordinary hours as one lump sum. So for a taxation record, if you click on where it says taxation down the bottom, you'll notice that it changes to taxation in here. That is how you know what one of these 4 tabs that you're on at the moment. So again, same theory, tick the new box. It will bring up a line up the top here where you would enter in the account number of the pay allocation that's been specified previously, and you would generally leave it blank to allocate the whole amount required. For settlement, same idea. As you can see, this is bank transfer 1, so it's using the bank details on number 1 on the employee record. If this was to use number 2, you would need to specify a different allocation to indicate it's using a different bank transfer record. In this area here, if you're wanting to specify one amount to a certain bank transfer and another amount to a different bank, then that's where you need to specify amounts. So for instance, if I'm paying $100 a week to this bank transaction and I wanted to create a new record to go to bank transfer 2. If I leave bank transfer 2, it will transfer the remainder of what's owed to that employee into bank transfer 2. So it's up to you how you want to split them, but that's always available for you to use. If you wanted to delete one of these records, you click on the line that you want to delete and click File, Delete, and save the record. And it has deleted that line that I just created. So that's as simple as it is. Once that's all set up, you can then go into payroll entry and take them through a pay batch. So that's what we might do, is go into payroll entry. So under payroll processing, we've got payroll entry. Now it's important to note that when it comes to payroll processing, it's important to use each step one by one. So payroll entry, preview payroll sheet, pay advice slips, etc., in the order in which they're displayed. The reason for that is each step has a way of processing things in the system, and if you skip a step, most likely you won't be able to go back. So it's important you keep to that step-by-step procedure. So to put a payroll batch through, we open up payroll entry, and it will bring up a record like this. It's showing you your last tax date and your last pay date. Now, if you're entering the next pay date, it cannot be before the last pay date. So as you can see, the 29th of July, I cannot enter the 28th of July 2013 because the last pay date was after that. So I can only enter the 29th of July or beyond. So what I might do is put in for the 30th of July, and it's just a matter of putting in those 6 numbers. So it doesn't matter what period I put in here, this is only notational. However, I'll put something realistic in there. It is a test system, so it's going to be fake data. But anyway, the Validate GL Accounts button here, this, if you're unsure of how your general ledger accounts are set up, for instance, you might be thinking you might have missed something, you might not have a GL account. If you click on this button, it will bring up a report of anything that it finds that's missing. If it says nothing to print, you're all good. So I'll click on this button, and it looks like it's going to bring, no, it's not. So as it says nothing to print, it means that all my GL accounts are in order and I'm right to keep going. You shouldn't need to do this very often. It's only if you're changing your general ledger in any case. So you click on OK, and that will bring up your payroll entry screen. We do have a list of different commands that you can use within payroll. And if you type in semicolon and press enter, it will bring up a list of all of those commands. So you've got 6 different types. You've got auto feed, you've got ETP mode, which I wouldn't worry about, that's a special circumstance. You've got a restart employee, which if you're going through a big batch of employees and you might have made a mistake on one employee, you can restart that line by putting in that command. You've also got employee details, which gives you more of a detailed screen, a view screen on your information on your employee. You've got your semicolon P, which is just your period, and that's basically your from and your to range in here. And you've got your termination mode, which we're not going to worry about today. So the common thing that's used is semicolon A, which is auto feed. Now after that's done, pressing enter will bring up the first one in the list. Now the employee 3 has been terminated, it's just letting you know that. So pressing enter should bring up the next one. The other thing to note with this is because it's not auto feeding, my data says that they've already been paid within the period. And as you can see by the 3 stars in front of the surname, that's indicating that the system is recognizing that that employee has already been paid for that period and shouldn't need to be paid again. But it's just up to you guys as to what the situation is. It may be that you'd need to override that. So let's bring up a couple of other employees. And that's a basic example of payroll. Now, if you needed to add something to an employee, there's a new line button here. So if you click on new line and put in the allocation for what you're wanting to add, so in this instance it's annual leave, So let's say, for instance, they took 1 day's annual leave. We put in 8 hours there. And of course, we'd need to adjust the ordinary hours as to reduce that by the 8 hours. So if we put 32 in there, it updates that record and it's all balanced. Okay, so you've got your period from and to in here. You can change that at any time. You can preview your current batch, and that will bring up basically a preview payroll sheet with all that information on it. Once you're okay with everything that's gone on there, you can accept the batch. It asks you if you're sure, and you go yes. And it's going through all of those employees, and it's removed them from your batch, and that's been put through into the system. So what we'll do is we'll quit out of here now, and we'll have a look at your preview payroll sheet, which was we had a shortcut to that before, and this is bringing up basically the same thing, except as you can see, this has got a different batch that's been entered into as well. And this is basically since the last final processing of the last pay batch, it's showing you the information that's been entered. So this information on screen will be what we are then going to process into the system. So double check your information in here. If anything on this screen is incorrect, you do have the opportunity of adjusting or reversing anything in the system that may be incorrect. It's always a good idea to keep copies of this information as well. I would highly recommend saving these records. It does reduce the need to physically print them, and does allow you, if you save them electronically, it does allow you to keep them basically forever. Just make sure that you keep them in a secure location, as this is sensitive information. The next option is your payroll sheet. Now this is basically the same as your preview payroll sheet, but the difference being is just having a look at the report being the same. The difference is it will bring up a reprint question. Now this is brought up because if you click no to the reprint question, it will clear all that data that you saw on the report, and it will clear it for the next lot to go in. So what we're going to do is, so for instance, if you're printing it physically to a printer, do not click no unless you've actually got the physical report in your hand, and it's only then that you would click no. So clicking no will clear the data. So if I do that, that information that I've just entered in the system will not be available for adjusting as such. You can, however, adjust it, but it's a bit more difficult. So click no to clear it. The next option is your payroll advice slips. So just bringing an example up on screen, this is basically your pay slips. And if you printed this in such a way that's sent off via email, you wouldn't normally get one on screen. This is only if it's not being sent via email or if it's being faxed. And this is what a payslip would look like, obviously with your company information customized up the top. And this is an example of an e-documents image. It's showing your ordinary hours, your taxation, whatever's been put through on your payroll batch. So you can save this record for future reference. You can physically print them. You can email them off to the employees at that point in time when you go to print them initially. And that's a good way of keeping track of all the payslips for your employees. So we'll close the tabs. Cash dissection listing is generally only used if you're paying employees by cash. If you are, and I'm just going to see if we have anything set up in the system that does, and it looks like we do. As you can see, we've got totals here. And that's just generally giving you a breakdown as to what kind of cash to give them. Okay, then you do your auto pay control list, which gives you an outline of anyone that's going to be paid online. So as you can see by this, you've got the information to pay the employees, what amounts, etc. Now, if you were set up to upload that information to your online banking system, this is the information that would be uploaded to the file. So it would do it automatically for you. Otherwise, you would work off this report and you would manually enter the figures in. So in order to output, again, you've got a reprint question. So once you click no, it clears the data. The last step would be to run a bank file output, and that file would be what you would then upload into your banking system. So if we open that up, it will give you a summary. It's just a unique identifier as to the number of transactions, the number of times the bank file output has been processed, the date, the number of transactions on the file, and the total credit amount. If you're ready to do this, you can click on the output button. That would output to your docs directory, in which case you would pick it up from the docs directory and push it up to your banking system. And that way all your pays would be done without you having to manually enter them in the second time. We're not going to do that today. Okay, so that's basically your payroll entry and everything that's set up that way before that. What we might do now is have a look at a couple of reports, and that's in your reports section, and I'll just minimize these so we can see it better. Okay, the first one is your PAYG withholding report. Now bear in mind, this actually rolls your month. So if we're in September, for instance, it would roll from September to October. So be careful using this. This is only be used when you're ready to roll the month. Otherwise, do not run this report. The next one would be, let's look at your pay allocation report. And this is actually used to report on exactly when the allocation in question has been used. So as you can see, we've got lists of different allocations that have been set up. So what we might do is create one for annual leave, and it can be defined other ways as well, as you can see by the qualifiers in the screen. So we'll just run one example to screen, and we're running a report based on your annual leave to see who has been processed annual leave and when. As you can see, it gives you a total as well as an annual leave total there as well. And you can see that because it's defaulted to the current financial year, it's got your date range as the full financial year in there as well. And the next one to look at would be your payroll register report. Now this is basically the same information as put through payroll entry. So rather than running your withholding report, if you're wanting information at a particular point in time, run your payroll register report. It's got the same information on it. Okay, I'll run an example to screen so you can see an example. And as you can see, it's the same as what you would see when you're running your payroll sheet. Okay, the next one would be your superannuation report. This defaults to the month, the current month in question. Disregard the actual detail, it's just fake data. So running this to screen, we give you all your superannuation information. This report includes valid super as well as invalid super. It also shows any extra super amounts as required over on the right hand side. And it will show one page per fund. So as you can see with this one, this is for the Spectrum Super Fund. If we scroll down, this one's for the Industry Super Fund. Users need to be aware about how they qualify this report in terms of what they are expecting the output to be. This really comes down to the fact that this report is based on a calculation together with the monthly threshold, not on static figures. So if you're qualifying this report by 2 months or more, it will be doing a calculation and working out an average as opposed to looking at static figures. So that's something to bear in mind there. Next thing we might look at is the annual report, PAYG annual report. This report should only ever be run in print preview mode unless you're rolling your actual year end. Now this is the only area in the system where you would run a year end. The rest of the areas in the system are based on a month by month rolling process. We do actually have a webinar on payroll year end, so if you're wanting any more information on rolling the year, then please see that. So we'll run a print preview. That's bringing up your information to confirm. Yeah. That was employee 1, so we won't worry about that for now. The next one we'll look at will be your employee entitlements report. So looking at that, you can choose a range of employees if you wish. You can base it on your gross cash or your total remuneration package. Showing you an example, and I might base it just on the gross cash, which is the default. I'll just bring one up to screen. And that will give you information on that. So that's showing you your hours that they are entitled to and the value of those hours. So you can run that at any time you wish. You do also have an employee detailed report, and I might run this qualifying by one employee so it doesn't take too long to bring up. And it's going to show you, again, the same information as you would get in payroll entry and your payroll sheet and things like that, just for that one employee. You don't have to qualify it by one employee. You can do it for your whole lot. Just depends on how you want to do it. You do also have an employee summary report. Again, the same kind of thing. You can choose what it's based on. I'll just choose the default. And as it's a summary report, I don't need to worry about it taking a while because it's just going to be summary information, as you can see. Okay. So I've basically explained that in order to run your month end, it's basically running your withholding report. Other than that, you can go through each of these other reports and investigate those as you see fit. Any more information, you can always contact our training department on the phone number. And for more information on our blog,